Welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the news podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Join us discussing the world of telecommunications, technology, and mobile innovations. From London, Dario Betti, MEF CEO.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, where it looks at the different topics, the different people that make up some of the big debates in our industry. And I'm very happy today to talk about identity, one of those key debates across all the areas of the mobile fields. But also, I'm very happy to talk today to Michael Becker. Michael Becker, the CEO and founder of Identity Praxis. And I should also say, Michael Becker, a long-term contributor in different shapes and form and activities of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum and its community. So thanks, Michael, for being here today. We turn the table. You usually ask questions, but today I'm asking questions to you.
Hey, Dario. Great. Welcome. Thank you for having me here. Excited.
Well, fantastic. Well, Michael, an industry leader for a long time, you've been involved, and we'll come back to that in different sides of the mobile ecosystem and identity. But today you sit here as an academic because you have recently finished your PhD, and I thought it would be great to pick your brain on some of the research you've been doing for the last, how long was that? 7 years?
Actually, and it's actually a doctorate in business administration at DBA versus a PhD. It's slightly different, but they're both terminal degrees. And I'm not just here as an academic, but I'm actually here as a business advisor and strategist that balances in both sides of the equation. Both how do we execute these ideas of identity and personal data within the business context, but actually how do we understand them through the academic lens as well. And that's really the root of my company name, Identity Praxis. Praxis is the Greek term for putting theory into practical application. So my whole point of existence is how do we take all of this, identity and personal data theory and actually put it into practical application for business.
So practice, here we go. We're going to be talking about the real stuff today, not just the theory. But let me actually start with a bit of a generic question. How's that, Bob? Because you are on the big chair, and our name is Perspectives in Mobile. So, Michael, what's your perspective? What's your view for the market of identity and identity on mobile?
Well, first and foremost, I want to challenge the question a little bit in that what do we mean by on mobile? Because a lot of people can interpret that question of I'm looking on my device, I'm interacting with the apps on my device, and that can be in my view, very limiting. So when I look at mobile, I often ask the question, is it on mobile, is it through mobile, or is it with mobile? And those are really important aspects and beings for us to consider. Because through mobile is the interaction of all of the different media channels and capabilities that we have on our mobile devices to be able to interact and engage collaboratively with those that we want to. With mobile is the ability for mobile to actually turn any physical media and even air and space into interactive media. So with mobile, we can use scan QR codes. We can respond to a long code or short code call to actions. We can tap our phones to point of sale systems or posters with NFC triggers. And so this ability for us to be able to interact with the world on, through, and with mobile, I think is a really critical distinction that we all need to understand. Likewise, because we are now essentially carrying with us our mobile devices extensively, some of us are even going as far as embedding connected chips into our bodies or interacting with the both fixed and mobile IoT devices in our lives. The construct of all of that means we've essentially become digital beings. We are now digital and physical beings coexisting in this same space. And I think that's an incredibly important concept to consider because as you think about it, there's estimates that says by the end of 2025, we will be interacting with an IoT, aka mobile device, roughly every 13 seconds of every day. And so why does that matter? Well, why that matters is every time we're walking around in this digital realm, I'll go as far as say leaking, we're contributing, we're distributing elements of our identity and our behavior and our personal data. And so when we think about the nature of where we are on, with, and through mobile, it's this core crux of what does it mean for us to be engaged with this mobile device. Now, when we look at that from the context of business, I think it's critical for us to think about the way that mobile is really shifting, and this idea of mobile as the core fulcrum of identity and personal data management in society going forward. And I'm sure in our discussion we'll get to the fundamentals of what I mean by that later. But it's really shifting the underlying architecture, not just technical architecture, but also regulatory architecture, legal architecture, commercial architecture, business architecture of how we connect, communicate, and conduct commerce with people. And I call that the 3 C's. And again, mobile is the core to every one of those 3 C's. It's the catalyst that enables connection. It's the fundamental medium to which that we enable communication. And it's a fundamental tool that we use to conduct commerce at a large way. And then with that, mobile's changing the customer journey. It's changing the friction points that we have within that customer journey. More importantly, I would argue that mobile, and because of all of the things we'll be talking about throughout the rest of this discussion, it is actually giving the individual, what I call the connected individual, a seat at the table. It's essentially leveling the playing ground. Mobile is also creating this ability for what I'm going to call the non-human customer. And then an identity and personal data play a huge role in that. And then the last couple things I would say as to where, what I see the grand view of the future on mobile is, as I said, the re-architecting of our regulatory frameworks and how we're moving throughout the world. So, for example, Gartner predicts that by the end of 2024, roughly 75% of the global population will be protected by one or more personal privacy and data regulations. Moreover, by the end of 2026, they're estimating that 500 million or more users will have a digital identity wallet on their phone, which is another massive trend that we're seeing in the marketplace. So kind of in that context, mobile is everything. It sits at the heart of our phygital lives, and it will continue to do so regardless of the framework to which it says. Like whether or not it's the smartphone, the smartwatch, the tablet, whatever terminal, smart glasses, smart contact lenses, embedded chips in our bodies, it's here with us and will be with us forever, in my opinion.
So interesting. It is on mobile. It is through mobile. It's with mobile and many more combinations.
Exactly.
So let's talk about. I was gonna ask you about some other concept, but I suspect it's very important, possibly, and you correct me, to go straight to the chase. I said, let's talk about your research, your DBA, if I got it right, your dissertation for your doctorate in business administration. So let's talk about digital identities there, because it seems that your research is really intertwined with that concept. What do you have in terms of what is a digital identity and how do we manage that? How do we manage the personal information you were talking about?
Well,
is there a new system in there? Is there a new approach that we are finding out?
Yeah, well, I mean, so what I looked at was, and again, it took me about 21 years to get it completed. And it actually started for me on October 15th, 2005, about 9 months prior to, my starting this track of research. I had started my doctoral process. And I was sitting there reading a paper from John Dighton and one of his co-authors on markets and privacy that he had written back as far back as 1991. And in that paper, they had suggested that personal data should be an economic asset owned by the individual. And at that time, when I read that concept, and I'm paraphrasing, that wasn't the exact words, I realized, oh my God, that's true. That's what I fundamentally core believe. And I'm now going to spend the rest of my career, the rest of my life figuring out how do we actually make that happen. And so the first paper I wrote on this concept of giving us control and ownership over our data within the marketing context was in 2006. And I proceeded to write books and papers and articles, and then ultimately culminated in my doctoral dissertation this summer. In looking at my dissertation, it was called Predicting the Factors of Personal Information Management System Use. And a PIMS is a new class of software that is emerging that will give us all ownership and control over our data. If and we don't have time today to go through the details. It's a 302-page research report. Appendix A, I actually map from 1890 to 2024 over 160 terms that society has been using and how those terms have evolved to be giving us self-sovereign control and agency of our data. And then the Appendix B, I map out over 50 initiatives that we've been engaging in society with trying to technically, commercially, and regulatorily make this happen, starting as early as 1946. So this has been a long road coming in us making this this concept of giving us control and ownership over our data as self-sovereign individuals. Now, at PIMS as a general term, there's also other terms related to it. Again, over 160, as I mentioned. But more aptly and more commonly in today's marketplace, you're going to hear the terms like digital identity wallet, identity wallet, personal data store, PIMS. Those are all related to the generalized same concept. And my research really looked at, again, I was asking myself the question, not necessarily how do we do it, but like what would entice people, what factors would influence people to actually want to look at and adopt a tool like this? Because we as society for decades have been investing billions and billions of dollars into the technology and the regulatory frameworks and all of that. But my dissertation was actually the first study that actually looked at, well, what would people really want from this? Do they really want it? How would they want it? How do we use it? And that's what I was looking at.
Well, I think there is a question that I think many people at home would probably share, which is, where do I start? Because how do I empower myself to do some of the great things you were saying? Eureka moment. How do we say power to the person, power to the owner of your personal data? Is PIMS the way for us to take control of digital identity? Is this happening somewhere? Can we take it as an example?
Yeah, no, it is certainly happening somewhere. And as I talk about in my dissertation and in the work I did with MEF and such, it's going to be happening in stages. So, like any technology, it takes time for it to be rolled out and gain traction in the mass market. So PIMS are here. And actually one of the leading use cases and examples of PIMS is actually in the country of Bhutan, who's launched the world's first self-sovereign national digital identity system, a digital identity wallet that actually gives self-sovereign control of the data to their citizens. Europe is about 2 years behind them, 18 months or so. Europe has launched, and we'll talk about this again in a second, the EEI-DAS 2.0 regulations. And within the next 18 to 24 months, every single EU member state will be rolling out a digital identity wallet similar to Europe, similar to Bhutan. Flanders has been, in Belgium, has been rolling with the Tim Berners-Lee Solid project, a personal digital identity system for its citizens now for almost 18 months or more. So we're starting to see pockets of this rolling out worldwide. From a business perspective, what we're going to first start seeing is this type of capability being embedded in companies that are recognizing that extreme trust is the key differentiator for market differentiation in the market. So and not only will that both ingratiate themselves with the consumer, but also ingratiate themselves with compliance and regulatory and governmental obligations. Because actually empowering individuals and giving them control of their data is actually, you get to kill multiple birds with one stone, the biggest being consumer attraction, intention to share a wallet, as well as the regulatory obligations and compliance obligations they have with government. So companies that are forward-thinking will start embedding these capabilities in their products and services. They will then start working with initiatives like the Global Acceptance Network, GAN, which is just launched in September. Bhutan is its first country-level member, but it's got several other commercial members as well. And that the GAN is looking at creating ecosystems of ecosystems. So how do we actually create the interoperability between these different independent embedded services and related services within like-minded ecosystems? And then eventually, say 5, 10 years from now, we're going to have more like SMTP-like global interoperable standard well-established protocols that will enable ability between PIMS at a more global level. But so we're going to see this kind of methodical evolution of the market happen over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. But to say that, but for the fact of the matter is PIMS are here and they're being actively used throughout the world right now. The other thing I might add to that is, you asked the question, what can I do to adopt and protect myself? And the way I interpreted and heard your question was, what can I as an individual do? And as I said, at the same time, there's what can I as a business do? And I think we need to answer both those questions. And I'm happy to address that, but I'll pause and let you react.
Well, no, let's do that, because I think I get your optimism saying the digital identity wallets, as we call them now, or PIMS as you call it, they're really coming on board, and we got different implementations. We also heard how platforms such as Apple is opening up potentially some of the functionalities for payments and identity and potentially being there in the mix as well. So lots of exciting things are happening on that side. you touch on, and later I was going to ask you, but what's the implication for me as a business? What do I?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, what do I do if I'm a business owner, Meth or anybody else? Does that changes the way we deal with people coming to our website, people coming to use our service?
Absolutely. It's gonna. So at the beginning, as I said, there's and Don Peppers wrote a book back in the I think it was 2006 or so called Extreme Trust, and he had mentioned that in the future, companies, the key differentiator between companies is going to be trust. Can I trust you? And so companies, the fundamental factor there will be for companies to establish this point of trust. And so I think understanding and how we define trust is critically important going forward in the market. And trust is really going to come down to what the industry often calls zero trust. So there is an ancient Russian proverb that suggests that trust but verify, which was popularized at least in the United States and I believe around the world by Ronald Reagan in the 80s. And this whole idea, trust people, but then go back it up, verify what they're doing. In the world of digital, what we've learned, and starting with, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but starting with a Forrester researcher in 2009 who coined this term called zero trust, meaning that we actually have to approach the industry with the assumption that there is no trust, that you cannot trust the other actor on the other side because you actually fundamentally don't know who they are. This becomes even more and more important when you think about in a world driven by APIs, application programming interfaces, which is becoming the fundamental nature in the way products and software and services are being built. How do we actually trust when one API is connecting to another? And what delegated authority that API or service has for exchanging our identity and personal data. So there's some fundamental architectural considerations that we need to be thinking about when it comes to trust. Defining this idea of trust, the concept of trust is absolutely crucial in every human endeavor. And as I just noted, in every non-human endeavor, an API to API or AI to AI. And that's something we can talk about in a minute. But trust is all about the actors in a situation, whether or not they be human or non-human, being willing to be vulnerable in conditions of uncertainty. That's really what trust is. If I am willing to be vulnerable with you in a condition of uncertainty, like I don't know what you're going to do or what I'm going to do, then that's where the necessity of this social construct we have is called trust. And according to my research, and you can read it about in my dissertation, trust really has these core three components. There is we engage in an interaction when we reasonably expect the other actor or actors that we're interacting with intend to meet their explicit or implicit obligations, that they intend us no harm, and that if they cause harm, they will take reasonable actions to mitigate that harm or be accountable for compensating me for the harm they caused. And those are the three fundamental things that we need to have in the marketplace for trust. A lot of businesses will say, okay, this is all great. This is hairy-fairy stuff. And what's the bottom line? Why does it really matter? And in my research, I actually discovered this wonderful research study from CallSign in 2022, where they actually at a macro level where it was able to determine that when you establish digital trust, this would increase with every 1% increase in digital trust, it would increase social trust by 0.8%. Which reportedly would increase digital trust by 5%, which then they calculated would lead to a $3,000 increase in the country's GDP per capita, right? And then if you actually take it a step farther to the macro level, studies over the last 10 years have suggested that when we have a trusted exchange of personal data and digital identities, and I want to get back to the definition of identity in just a minute, the average country's GDP will grow somewhere between 1% to 13%. So enabling trusted flows of identity and data within our macroeconomic frameworks is fundamentally critical for every economy around the world. And frankly, that's why Bhutan is what it's done. I call it the lighthouse on top of the world, shining a light to establishing a sustainable future. Bhutan is a case study that I think we all need to watch and monitor, because it's truly showing a path to actually how we can actually maintain and have a sustainable future. The macro impacts of trust are equally as important at a country level, and that are an individual level, in that research and MEF research has attested to this as well. Is if I don't trust you, I don't buy from you. Right? Period. Right? If I don't trust you, I stop the commerce interaction. So if you remember, I talked about the 3 C's: connection, communication, and commerce. If I don't trust you, I don't connect with you. If I don't trust you, I don't communicate with you. If I don't trust with you, I don't conduct commerce. And at every one of those stages along the customer journey, and every one of those stages through a framework I call the connectivity keystone strategy, trust is the preeminent core element there. So that if people feel that lack of trust, they will buy products and services from you. And in fact, they'll abandon and defect from you. So trust will fundamentally play a critical role. And then the last thing I want to say about trust is we're actually seeing trust play itself out in regulations as well as in technology. So in regulations from a consumer side, businesses have to adopt trust to have know your customer regulations, anti-money laundering regulations, anti-terrorist regulations. You need to regulatorily, and if you're like a bank, you have to do it quite regularly, but you need to know who you're doing business with. And that's called know your customer. And there's a whole bunch of factors around that. Likewise, you want to establish and adopt a whole suite of new and additional technologies, which we can talk about in a different question, when it comes to actually how do you do this identity and data authentication thing. The other thing that I think that's important when we're thinking about trust is it's also because of digital wallets, because of digital identity, we're also seeing a shift from not only do businesses need to know who the customer is, increasingly customers, individuals, the connected individual, as I was saying earlier, they're going to get to know who the business is. So you're starting to see an increasing number of services like KYB, KYE, know your business, know your entity, where individuals will be able to cryptographically verify, am I actually working with the company who is communicating with me? And in the mobile context, a case example of that is with it's been around for quite some time, but Apple just adopted it in September of this year, Rich Communication Services, RCS. So part of the RCS messaging protocol stack is a verified sender capability, so that individuals, when they receive an RCS message and look at that logo that's in the message, that's kind of cryptographically assured from the carrier networks that that company has been previously vetted and is who they say they are, and they are the only one that could actually be sending that message. And we're going to see more and more verified sender-like capabilities make their way into the marketplace. So we don't need to go into the technological aspects of that now, but that's something for businesses to be very, 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 very aware of right now. You must start adopting verified sender, verified caller capabilities. In the U.S., you also have the branded caller ID program. One of the leading, few of the leading players of that are like Aegis, a MEF member. Another leading member of that is Numerical, who does branded calling capabilities. Companies can actually, when they're initiating phone calls, especially on the mobile, can actually be sending cryptographic signals to the phone that here's my logo, here's my name, and yes, you can guarantee that this person calling you is me. So then then that leads me to the final thing that will be happening, that will be substantially establishing trust in the marketplace, is there's a whole wealth of new initiatives that are happening in the market, primarily through three entities: the Content Authenticity Initiative, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, and the Content Accessions Working Group. And what these initiatives, one of my good friends, Eric at Adobe, is helping lead in one of the Content Assertions Working Group. The whole point there is to embed and imbue provenance and authenticity in content. So when a video is being shared, when an image is being shared, you can actually know that if that's real content, where it came from, does it have provenance, and to be able to do so in a anonymized way as well. So in certain instances, so for example, if someone in the press is in a war-torn country reporting on that press, you want them to be able to take pictures and report on that scene, but not necessarily disclose their name, because that could put their life at risk. So there's issues along that way too. And how do we actually are able to disseminate and consume content while knowing it's actually authentic and where appropriate, knowing its provenance? All of those aspects technologically are starting to happen in the marketplace to establish and build trust.
Michael, thanks for bringing up so many of the topics, and at least two of our members, and I say two because Aegis is a member, so it's Numerical. So you see great companies come and talk about identities here at MEF. But I'd like to not talk about the companies now. I'd like to go back to their questions about users, because one thing that caught my attention in your dissertation is the factors influencing adoptions of those PIMs, of those wallets, etc., that will contain our information, our data, our identities. And you say that actually there are lots of factors that will allow us, or as a general group of beings, to welcome those much more. So what should we look out there? What are the main factors? What is the approach that we should take to make sure that there are more of those users of digital identities and their containers?
Yeah, sure. And so in my study, so when I was doing my research, starting around 1950 or so is when we started looking at technology theory, like particularly technology adoption theory. And over the last 4 or 5 decades, there's been over 35, 40 theories that we've been using and applying to look at that. One of the preeminent and seminal theories is what's called the reasoned action approach, or theory of planned behavior, which was one of its predecessor names. And that concept says, and it suggests that our actual behavior will be influenced by our behavioral intention, and that behavioral intention is influenced by our attitudes towards the technology, the social influences we have related to it, and our sense of control, what the theory refers to as perceived behavioral control. And so in my study, I took the core framework of the theory of reasoned action, or the reasoned action approach, and looked at attitude, subjective norms, perceived behavioral control as they influence behavioral intention, then ultimately actual behavior. Because my study is also unique too, is that I actually studied actual behavior as well, not just the intention to behave. And then I modified it by adding the layer of trust, which was also quite unique. And looking at well over 50 factors, maybe a few more, I zeroed it down into these core few factors that companies and individuals need to consider when it comes to what might influence our intention or our behavior to actually adopt a personal information management system, aka a digital wallet. Likewise, my study was able to actually demonstrate that these factors could actually, or suggest that these factors actually would actually influence actual behavior as well. And so in terms of trust, it's, do I trust the technology to manage my digital identity and data? Do I trust the capabilities of the tool to actually do it? And do I trust the provider that's providing that capability? So those are factors. So do I generally have a trust of technology? Do I trust the tool? Do I trust the provider? So trust, again, weaved throughout the entire study. When it came to attitude, it really came down to about this idea of data control with technology. Do I believe that technology will help me control my data and my identity? And that was a core factor. Interestingly enough, I looked at 9 different social influences, and I only found 4 of them statistically significant. The one was digital experts. The second one was news, data breach and misuse. So can I rely on a digital expert to help inform me? Can I rely on a trusted advisor to inform me? Can I rely, am I being influenced by the news and the industry about data breaches and the misuse of data? And then on the people I follow on social media would influence me. And so those were the social influences that we learned. And what was fun with my study is because I had a large enough cohort, and I studied about 2,600 U.S. people, 2,600 people in the U.S. So I was able to do some cohort analysis as well. And so I broke it down across 12 different cohorts. And you can look at the study; it's freely available on the internet, and the MEF can distribute it. But interestingly enough, like, men were influenced by experts, but not advisors. Women were influenced by their advisors, but not experts. So it was kind of interesting to see the nuances of income and education and age and gender, and more importantly, one's previous experience with harm. So I had 4 or 5 questions around previous experience with harm. And that was quite nuanced across the cohorts as well. We don't have time to go into those level of details, but for companies, you need to understand those influences if you're going to serve the connected individual. And then finally, when it came to perceived behavioral control, it really came down to, do I have the confidence to do it? And can I trust that I can learn to do it? I use a tool like this. And so really, the fundamental results of my study came down to, across every cohort, the one consistent factor for everyone was trust. Then across the other factors that was influenced were different by the cohorts. The second common factor across every cohort, education. Teach me how to do this, both from a business perspective as well as from an individual perspective. And then I really think that's where an organization like MEF needs to play a role, and that we need to be effectively educating industry as well as the individual. And I can talk about what I believe individuals need to consider if you'd like, but I'll pause right there.
Well, I think I'm looking at the time, and not surprising, but it flew, and we already went past the half hour. I think we'll have to continue in another discussion. There's some of the other forum as well at MEF. But before I let you go, I wanted to ask you now a question of what comes next, because as you said, 21 years, I know the last few years, very intense on your dissertation and your work. And now you sit on that, and what's next then for you and Identity Praxis? Now that all of that work is behind you, now what are you going to concentrate on? What's the next step?
Well, I would argue that all of the work is just getting started. Because the dissertation is a milestone that says, okay, this makes sense. Now, where do we take it from here? It's really a foundation as opposed to an end cap. So to that point, I want to to the point of where I think individuals need to go. I have a model I've developed called the fivefold path to digital sovereignty. We as individuals, as humans, need to be aware of the issues around our identity and data. We need to change our behaviors, adopt professional services, enact our data rights, and adopt passive and active technologies in our life. All 5 of those pillars resting on community and education. And so I see myself building out the fivefold path to digital sovereignty on helping companies deliver those types of services, helping organizations like MEC deliver that message to achieve that. Likewise, I think we're at a crossroads in society right now. I believe if we allow entropy and Newton's third law to hold true, we will continue going down the path of dystopia, where we'll live in a world where Orwell was an optimist, and we will have no control over our identity and data. If we overcorrect and we go down to a right path, to a path of utopia, we'll enter into a world where it will equally be uncontrolled and kind of chaotic. So I believe we need to take a middle path, a panutopia path, that would lead us to the identity nexus, where we can find a macro equilibrium state of the flow, the risk to reward ratio, the flows of our personal data and identity throughout society, plus the net value of the externalities. And that path, that identity nexus, I actually model an equation for it. I believe whoever ends up solving that equation is going to win a Nobel Prize, similar to Eleanor Ostrom with her thoughts around the community commons and some research that was done in the 70s on transactional economic theory. So fivefold path to digital sovereignty, solving the identity nexus equation, critically important for me. I hope to one day advise companies and countries like Bhutan, or continue to advise companies like the Mobile Ecosystem Forum or Assurant or others that want to embrace and get involved with what it means to be able to live in this new and exciting world. And on that note, the one point I want to say is when I look at the technology that's coming, and I look at what Bhutan's doing, when I look at what Europe is doing, when I look at what other countries that are, India even with their ADHAR program, we are going to enter into a world where new public-private good infrastructure, especially in Africa, this is going to play a major role. Public-private good infrastructure is going to be established, where companies will be issuing through digital identity wallets, foundational identities, which will effectively be accessible for free, just like our driver's licenses are today. And that companies will realize that they can access those foundational identities for a much lower cost than they could be using the multi-billion-dollar IDV marketplaces that exist today. And so we're going to see some fundamental shifts in the architecture of how we manage identity and personal data. And then with that in mind, we're going to see changes in biometric authentication, multi-factor authentication, the mass market adoption of digital identity wallets worldwide. I think Gartner's numbers are low. It's not going to be 500 million. It's going to be in the billions. We're going to start seeing both sides of the artificial intelligence story change, both from a business perspective as well as individual personal agents that will be adopted by people. And then most importantly, and then one of the foundational technologies that will arise with all of this is liveness testing. How do we actually know, am I dealing with an artificial agent, a non-human actor, or am I dealing with a human actor? And is that human actor who they say they are? And is that artificial agent who they say they are? So these are all threads of topics that I'm continuing to pursue and interacting on the commercial side. And I'm then bridging that with my other personal interests where I'm a teacher. I teach strategic mobile marketing and marketing at National University in Cal Poly. And I also have developed a methodology called the 5 C's of knowledge management. And I teach personal knowledge management, all of which is around how do I actually curate my personal data and identity so that I can actually be training my personal AI and elements like that. So that's really where my kind of career path is going and where we go. And when I go back to this beginning, you mentioned that I was an academic. And that's always bothered me for years because in 1906, Bernard Shaw wrote a play called Superhuman. And in that play, he references those who can do, those who can't do, teach. And that bothered me most of my life until most recently, I recently rewrote that quote. And I said, and to this new quote, and then I say, those who can do, those who can't do, teach. Those who want to make a difference in the world, do both. And so it's really my passion in the world to be doing both, to be both doing helping companies embrace this identity and personal data, helping individuals embrace their digital sovereignty, helping companies helping countries achieve that national identity nexus metric, so that we can all have a sustainable future going forward. And again, I look at Bhutan as a really watershed use case that I think the entire world should be paying attention to. So that's what I'm excited about going into 2025.
Plenty of. And Michael, we're now out of time, but thank you again for being here. It's fantastic. I think we need more time to go into a lot more details of all the things you mentioned today. Sounds super exciting.
Well, bring me back anytime. I love it. Thank you very much.
And we'll love it too. Meanwhile, if you've been listening so far, thank you very much. Remember to like our podcast and stay on us, either on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or on MEF Radio, or MEF.media, and or our app on the Android and iPhone platform. So thank you very much, and until next time. And thank you again, Michael Becker from Identity Praxis.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. Join us next as we explore telecoms, technology, and mobile innovations. Stay tuned, stay connected, and let's unlock the mobile potential together.